will be Dr. Pauline Muchina. Let me introduce her. She will give some remarks. Following her will be Mr. Guy De Joken and Dr. Mohammed Gimba. So I will go ahead and introduce Dr. Muchina, and you will join me in welcoming her virtually on this segment of Watch Africa, where I got a chance to go from Nairobi to Mombasa to Siaya, you know, and all these different places. So I consider myself having well visited, and I hope I will continue to be welcome in Dala. I think did I say Dala?
Good for you. Wow. So you saw the real Kenya, not Nairobi. So that's a big point.
Absolutely. Indeed.
Yes. Thank you so much, Eric, for the warm introduction. And yes, you're welcome back to Kenya. You know, that's home for everybody in the diaspora who feels they're looking for a home. You know, I believe that our country and other African countries are open to our sisters and brothers around the world. So thank you so much for visiting, and come back. So I want to thank Watch Democracy Grow for hosting us in this very important conversation. Mary, thank you so much for the work that you do. It is such an important work or job. This morning, you know, I come to you as an associate of the organizations that have been mentioned, but I do want to make it clear that although I may refer or reference some of the work that we are doing with those organizations, I am not going to be like, this is my personal reflections. So it may not represent the official positions for the organizations that I represent or their approaches or missions of this institution. I also come to this conversation as a Black woman in the diaspora, if you haven't noticed yet, even after Eric talked about my home country. I am a liberation womanist, a Kenyan theologian, and a person of faith, a person who believes in working towards our full potential. That's why I created the two institutions that were mentioned before. I am a Pan-Africanist whose worldview is shaped by my upbringing in faith, our rich African traditions, respect for our ancestors, and the Ubuntu spirit in all of us. When I spoke to Mary last evening, and Mary, don't scream, I thought I had my presentation all done and ready to go. However, this morning I woke up early and realized that what I had was just another academic presentation that may put you to sleep. So I thought to myself, if I was the audience this morning, what would I really want to hear? It was in that thought process that I made the decision, instead of making a presentation, I would rather have an honest conversation with you. And this is my honest conversation. Although it may put you to sleep, I hope that you can at least go or with one or two things from this. But more importantly, I hope this conversation will continue within yourself and also people with whom you interact. I plan to continue this conversation with myself and hope to engage others in this process. I take this moment to remember the families that have lost loved ones to COVID-19, those who are struggling with the pandemic or pandemic-related illnesses, and those who are scared to death about this coronavirus, myself included. By the way, we should be scared and work hard to protect ourselves and others whenever we can. Politicians are not ready to protect us. They've showed us that. In fact, some of them have decided to act as if COVID doesn't exist. It should not impact your life, they say. How can it not impact our lives while we watch our brothers and sisters suffer? While some of us suffer directly, while we watch some of our talented leaders and entertainers die in European and African hospitals and American hospitals, While we think of over 1 million dead globally and 220 dead in the United States. Yes, when it has distracted our lives in many ways, many cannot even make ends meet, and economics in our countries have gone back 20 to 30 years, according to economic experts. Don't forget our brothers and sisters murdered by police and systems that uses violence to disperse us from peaceful demonstration. Black Lives Matter, we shout and hope that and pray that we all vote next week. Those who can, let's vote to change the situation in which we find ourselves. So what does infrastructure development mean to me? Officially, some people have said it is the construction of basic foundational service in order to stimulate economic growth and quality of life improvement. Most advanced economies have gone through periods of intensive infrastructure building that have improved their efficiency and competitiveness of those regions. To me, that's why I said it was going to be a conversation. It means building different tools that leads to making life better for our people, while at the same time honoring and protecting the environment. Like many scholars of African affairs, I believe that infrastructure development is the key to Africa's realization of its full potential. For example, Dr. Ibrahim Mayaki, the Chief Executive Officer of NEPAD, states that infrastructure is the key to all aspects of social and economic transformation in Africa. Dr. Mayaki recognizes that African countries need infrastructure to have viable economies and sustainable economic growth. I agree with Dr. Mayaki. I also believe that no matter how much natural resources we have in Africa, without infrastructure development, we will continue to lag behind almost in everything. Therefore, I ask myself, for Africa's infrastructure development to happen, do we need democracy to grow? Mary and others, do we need democracy to grow to achieve infrastructure in the continent? Can we build the infrastructure needed without institutions that are justice-oriented and respect the human dignities and the human rights and dignity of citizens in African countries? Is infrastructure development possible without accountability from our African leaders? And I ask myself also this morning, why are African economies said to be growing faster than any other region, and yet the infrastructure isn't catching up? Why is the gap between the rich and the poor too large in our continent, and poverty continues to ravage citizens in the middle of massive natural resources and fertile lands? Africa is not poor. Why do we have majority of the poor of the world in the continent? Think about it. What is really at stake in the continent? According to New Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, which I mentioned before, only 38% of the African population has access to electricity. 38%. Less than 10% of Africa's population has access to the internet. Think about that. Think about that. The cost of closing the digital divide in Africa is estimated at approximately $9 billion per year. And this would include laying out at least 250,000 kilometers of fiber across the region. In 2018, information and communication technology infrastructure financing was projecting or estimating $7 billion a year, US dollars. with 80% of this amount coming from the private sector investments. And remember, Africa's private investment or private sector investments is affected by what? It's affected by infrastructure development. Only a quarter of Africa's road networks is paved, and many areas have no accessibility to roads or transportation. Most roads are not usable during the rainy season. Studies have shown that poor roads, rail, and port facilities add 30 to 40% to the cost of goods traded among African countries. This jeopardizes the private sector development and the flow of foreign investments in Africa. Water supply remains weak and dysfunctional. Communities in urban centers, like in Nairobi, can stay for 2 weeks without running water. Water supply in countries like Kenya remains a huge infrastructure challenge that puts the health of the citizens at risk and undermines industrial trade in many African countries. You will tell me, Eric, if I go more than 20 minutes, please. The World Bank estimates that the poor state of infrastructure in many parts of Africa reduced national economic growth by 2 percentage points every year, and also cut business productivity by as much as 40%. This makes Africa, in spite of its enormous minerals and other natural resources, the region with the lowest productivity levels in the world. We produce raw materials that helps every other region of the world to develop. They actually survive by most of our products. You know, ask most Americans to go out here without coffee, you know, in the morning, or tea, or sugar, or, you know, whatever you want to mention. And then you realize that even if they are not coming directly from Africa, they are coming from countries like Brazil, where, you know, we know our brothers and sisters are the ones who are farming there. You look at the Caribbean, it's the same thing. So it is us, in my opinion, who really sustain the economies of the so-called developed world. Education system in the continent are behind the curve. Not enough schools in many parts of Africa. Most families cannot afford adequate education for their children. Schools lack necessary resources, including tools such as libraries with books, computers, and labs. Many children in Africa go to schools in buildings that are falling apart, and some are under the tree. My brothers and sisters, some of these infrastructure development challenges are a legacy of colonialism and models they left behind and continue to promote through neo-colonialism. Can Africa achieve infrastructure development without shacking off colonial legacy, imperialism, and neo-colonialism? A few African scholars argue that that is impossible. From Frank Fanon's writings in The Wretched of the Earth to Ngugi wa Thiong'o's emphasis on the decolonization of the African mind, I believe that we cannot achieve infrastructure development in Africa without decolonization of the African mind. The second liberation from colonialization and imperialism and neo-colonialism. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I am convinced that Africa will continue treading the wheels until we break through the colonization of our minds, so that we can begin to think for ourselves, work with each other to find solutions, harness our resources, which we have in plenty, you know, and resources, and we harness them in a sustainable manner and use them to make life better for our people, not for other regions. Okay, we can share. We are a generous people, so we can always share. Not saying that we don't, but how are all those natural resources helping our people? Africans must take ownership of our development. You know, it's amazing how many external experts tell us what we need to be doing in the continent. And our governments follow as if it is God who has spoken to them. That cannot continue if we really want to achieve real and sustainable infrastructure development. We can continue providing, as I said, materials and cheap labor and watch the rest of the world grow and solidify their infrastructure growth. Or we can decide to change that and ensure that our natural resources are used for the well-being of our people. My brothers and sisters, the choice is ours. We need ways of thinking and building infrastructure to foster democracy, to grow our businesses and engage each other regionally, provide services to our urban and rural citizens by focusing on human development and eradicating poverty through the redistribution of resources and equal access to assets such as land and capital. This year, COVID has exposed all the challenges of infrastructure in Africa. Most African countries had to face the reality of lack of essential products because we rely heavily on China and other countries to supply them. Lack of PPEs put health workers at risk from the beginning and continues to cause a challenge to an effective COVID response. Some of the hospitals became overwhelmed, not because of the high number of COVID infection, but because the health system infrastructure in many African countries is inadequate. Yesterday, a prominent Kenyan lawyer died on arrival to the hospital. At home, his condition was serious, and condolences to the family. He could have been airlifted to the hospital. He had the money, he had the resources, but the local airstrip in his home area did not work. He was taken to the hospital by road, mostly unpaved from his home area, and died on arrival at the hospital. As expert continues to urge people to wash their hands throughout the continent and the world with running water to protect themselves from the coronavirus, many Africans are asking or wondering how they could sustain such a prevention strategy while they don't even have drinking water. Water has become a very expensive commodity that most people cannot afford. COVID is a big wake-up to us as African countries. Pandemics will decimate our societies if we don't have strong infrastructures as health system, running water, usable roads, rails, ports, and electricity. Imagine the havoc that it has caused here. And there is still a threat in African countries. So we need to continue to pray and work hard to make sure that it doesn't happen there. No amount of trade deals, aid, or anything will remove the need for infrastructure development. Sorry. The Africa Continental Free Trade Zone area that has been talked about, you probably have already had it, which will be the largest single market in the world for goods and services, as we have, as well as the movement of investment and people, urgently needs infrastructure to back it up. It's gonna fail like tomorrow without the proper infrastructure. And we want it to succeed because we know how important it is to our people. Transportation between African countries and inside most African countries is terrible. Ferrying goods from one place to the other is almost impossible. How is the free trade zone going to succeed without the infrastructure to back it up? AU through NEPAD has established an ambitious long-term plan for closing Africa's infrastructure gap. I'm not sure how they are doing. It would be good to evaluate it. And this is the PIDA. PIDA is the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa. This was established in 2019 and all heads of state signed on to it. It is a 30-year strategy by NEPAD, the African Union, and African Development Bank, focusing on regional transboundary projects. The good thing about PIDA is that it was designed from the bottom up, because most of what we see comes from the bottom, from the up down, and it doesn't work. Africa can take advantage of advances in innovation in other places, and also the falling cost of low carbon technologies and the need to diversify and strengthen, economies in our country. We can learn from the experiences of the global community, but they cannot run the infrastructure for us. China cannot run the infrastructure of Africa, and for it to be sustainable, we need to ask ourselves, what are they getting in return?
Yes.
And it is very, very worrisome. Look at the debt yoke that African countries now have acquired from China.
Mm-hmm.
Infrastructure development is urgently needed to meet the demand of a growing youth population. Youth make the largest population in Africa. They are savvy with technology and they need employment. The Advocacy Network for Africa understands this, and that's why we are actively advocating not only for a global COVID response that includes spatial drawing rights. Without the SDRs, many countries around the world will not be able to revive their economies that have been devastated by COVID.
Indeed, indeed. I would ask the speaker to kindly just bring it to a close, and then we will leave the rest for discussion, just so that we stay on schedule. I know there's a lot.
How much more time do I have?
Well, your time has expired, so
Oops.
if you can say one or two sentences to close.
Okay, sorry. So our group is urging and demanding, and we keep on pushing our leaders as well to act responsibly and account for resources within our countries. Although African countries have recorded fewer cases, this is going to continue to be a problem. So let's continue to find resources that can really help us to have sustainable infrastructure development without selling our souls to other regions. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much.